The chamber was tense, the air thick with nervous anticipation. Kristi Noem, flanked by stern-faced aides, had just finished her statement at the International Security Forum in Geneva. Her voice had cut through the hall like a cold blade. Some leaders aren't here to build peace, they're here to disrupt order. And let's be honest, Ibrahim Traoré is a threat to global stability. The words echoed, leaving silence in their wake. Cameras pivoted, eyes turned. And then he walked in. Traoré didn't flinch. His steps were measured, confident, the kind of walk that comes not from arrogance, but from surviving fire. A silence settled over the audience, the kind that precedes something no one expects but everyone senses. He didn't wait for a welcome. "You speak of order?" Traoré said calmly, stepping forward, his voice low but resonant. "Your order built on looted minerals, broken treaties, and forgotten bodies?" Murmurs rippled across the crowd. Journalists scrambled to unmute their microphones. Noem stood, visibly tensing. "We've worked tirelessly to maintain a rules-based world." Traoré raised a hand, not rudely, but with the authority of someone who had buried the results of those rules. "You fear disorder," he continued, "but you never feared injustice. You fear what I represent, a continent that no longer bends, no longer begs. A continent ready to rise, not with permission, but with purpose." His words weren't loud, they didn't need to be. A quiet thunder grew. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. Others, especially those from the global south, nodded, subtly, but unmistakably. Then Traoré turned fully toward Noem. "You say I am a threat," he said, his tone sharpening like a blade drawn from silk. "Then fear me." He didn't shout. He whispered it like a warning delivered just before a storm. The silence that followed was not confusion, it was recognition. A man had walked into their cathedral of power and declared himself not a guest, but a reckoning. The room didn't recover. As Traoré stepped down from the podium, the international press erupted like a volcano long overdue. The headlines practically wrote themselves: Traoré defies the West, again, Burkina Faso's lion roars in Geneva, Kristi Noem left speechless at Security Summit. But Noem wasn't silent for long. That night, she went live on every major American news network. With the flag behind her and carefully chosen lighting, she stared into the camera and declared, "We are witnessing the rise of a dangerous radical. Traoré may dress like a diplomat, but make no mistake, he is an agent of chaos, a threat to Western values and to global peace." Her team followed with a digital assault, edited clips, dramatic soundbites, out-of-context moments stitched together to turn Traoré into a caricature, a mad general from a forgotten corner of the world. Fox, CNN, even the BBC looped Noem's "threat to order" soundbite on repeat. But Traoré had seen propaganda before. He'd lived through it, fought under its shadows, and buried men who believed it. He didn't call a press conference. He didn't post a video. Instead, he walked into the heart of Geneva's refugee quarter the next day, no cameras, no speeches, just a plain uniform and an honest presence. Children ran to him, clutching hand-drawn flags of Burkina Faso. Elders took his hands and muttered prayers in languages reporters didn't bother to learn. He sat with them, listened, ate from their bowls, and asked them one question: "What do you need to stand again?" Photos leaked. Real ones. No filters. No handlers. Just a man with dirt on his boots and fire in his eyes. That's when the tide shifted. Online, a storm erupted. #FearMe started trending globally, but not in the way Noem had hoped. African youth reposted clips of Traoré's speech, cut with images of resistance, of colonizers retreating, of rising suns over red clay. Commentaries flooded in: "They fear him because he doesn't fear them," one viral post read. "Not because he threatens war, but because he threatens their illusion of control." By the time Noem tried to double down, her narrative had already slipped from her fingers like dust. When Kristi Noem stepped onto the CPAC stage in Dallas, she was all swagger and sarcasm. "Some say Traoré is a reformer," she mocked, her voice dripping with contempt. "But from where I'm standing, he looks more like a fire waiting to burn everything civilized." The crowd of her supporters laughed, a wave of red, white, and blue pride echoing across the room. But behind the curtain, Traoré heard every word. He didn't flinch. Instead, he waited, patient, calm, calculating. As Noem finished her speech and exited the stage, she found him waiting near the press corridor. Cameras were flashing, journalists swarming. And Traoré, with that stillness only a battlefield leader knows, turned to her with a voice that didn't need to shout. "You fear what you cannot control," he said. "And what you call order is just your permission to oppress." Noem rolled her eyes, dismissive, but the cameras caught something she didn't expect, the quiet shifting of reporters leaning toward Traoré. The tone of the room had shifted. A journalist from CNN asked, "Governor Noem says your presence in America is dangerous. What's your response?" Traoré didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed locked on Noem. "I've seen danger," he said. "It wears suits, smiles for cameras, and funds war in the name of democracy." Noem's expression hardened. This wasn't just political theater. It was a public reckoning. Behind the scenes, Republican strategists were already whispering, she thought she could outshine him. Instead, she lit the fire he needed. Within hours, social media was ablaze. #FearTraoré trended worldwide. Clips of his words went viral, not just in Africa, but in Europe, in South America, even in parts of conservative America that had grown tired of hollow speeches and polished propaganda. The contrast was brutal. Noem talked law and order. Traoré embodied moral clarity. By midnight, even pundits on Fox were split. Some called him dangerous. Others, disturbingly compelling. But what mattered wasn't their spin. It was the silence from Noem's camp. She had thrown a spark, but Traoré had become the storm. The next morning, Capitol Hill buzzed with chaos, not because of a bill, a scandal, or a protest, but because of one man's stare. Every hallway whisper included the name Traoré. Overnight, his confrontation with Kristi Noem had transformed from an awkward exchange into a political earthquake. The footage played on loop across networks. Her jab had landed. His response had shattered. In her office, Noem stared at the TV, watching herself freeze under Traoré's words. "It's manipulation," she muttered. "He's playing the victim." But even she didn't believe it. Not fully. Meanwhile, in a secure conference room across D.C., Traoré met with members of the Congressional Black Caucus and a few progressive allies. It wasn't an official summit, it was a signal. He didn't need a podium to lead. The room leaned in every time he spoke. His voice wasn't raised, but the gravity in it was undeniable. "You cannot speak of freedom," he said, "while funding regimes that erase it." Representative Jamal Bowman nodded slowly. "They don't know how to handle you," he admitted. "You don't fit their scripts." Outside, a protest formed, but not against Traoré, against Noem. Hundreds gathered, holding signs that read, "Fear me? Then you're the problem. Traoré speaks. We listen. Order without justice is tyranny." Fox News scrambled to shift the narrative, labeling Traoré as an unstable foreign figure who posed a threat to American values. But the footage told a different story. His poise, his calm, his refusal to lower himself to Noem's provocations. Even skeptical viewers admitted it. He looked like a leader. Back in South Dakota, Noem's base was split. Her supporters had come for defiance, but left with doubt. Had she underestimated him? Had she awakened something deeper, more global? One op-ed in The Atlantic asked the question no one in the GOP dared to voice. What happens when a man like Traoré walks into your empire and makes you look like the tyrant? The answer? You scramble, you panic, you try to control the story. But Traoré wasn't interested in stories. He was rewriting them. The White House Situation Room was unusually tense. Kristi Noem sat stiffly at the far end of the polished table, surrounded by high-ranking advisors, military aides, and national security figures. A large monitor displayed paused footage of Traoré addressing a crowd of protesters. Not in Burkina Faso, but in front of the Lincoln Memorial. No flags, no guards, just raw presence. President Trump's acting advisor leaned forward and growled, "Why the hell is he still here?" Noem didn't answer. She couldn't. Across the country, the images had ignited something deep. In cities like Oakland, Atlanta, Detroit, and even parts of Texas, murals were going up overnight. They didn't show Noem. They didn't show Trump. They showed Traoré, his back turned, fists raised, words like, "Justice means fearless truth," painted above him. "What's our move?" someone asked. Noem snapped. "He's not an American citizen. He's here under diplomatic terms. Revoke his credentials. Deport him." Silence. Then a voice from Homeland Security, "That would be dangerous. You'd make him a martyr." Exactly. That was the problem. Back at the hotel, Traoré sat by the window, watching as people gathered below. He didn't need to speak, his presence said enough. But when the press begged for a statement, he stepped out, calm, centered. "I was told I'm a threat to order," he began. "But when order means silence in the face of injustice, then I gladly accept that threat." The crowd roared, not with chaos, but clarity. Meanwhile, in a primetime CNN segment, Anderson Cooper leaned forward and said what few dared to. "Has Kristi Noem just handed Traoré the moral high ground of the entire global South?" Back in South Dakota, her approval rating slipped. A clip of her confrontation with Traoré was trending again, this time with the subtitle, "She thought she was the one giving orders." She watched it again that night, in her study. Alone. Her finger hovered over the remote. She rewound the moment he turned to her, his gaze piercing, but not angry. Just, deliberate. Then "Fear me." 2 words that echoed longer than any speech she'd ever given. Noem's political play had backfired. What was meant to humiliate a foreign figure had instead anointed him with something far more powerful than title or rank. Legitimacy. And the world had noticed. The Capitol was supposed to be a fortress of American authority. Marble, flags, controlled voices behind wooden panels. But as Ibrahim Traoré entered its halls the next morning, unannounced, unshaken, he did so with the calm defiance of someone who knew the walls were no longer sacred. Kristi Noem was already there, standing beside a panel of congressmen, her team working overtime to paint the previous day as a momentary lapse. She needed to shift the narrative fast. But the reporters weren't looking at her. Their cameras swiveled. Their microphones stretched. Because Traoré was there, not shouting, not even gesturing. Just walking. Deliberate. Grounded. As if history moved with him. Noem tried to recover. "We welcome dialogue," she said through clenched teeth. "But we will not tolerate disruptions to our democratic institutions." That was her opening. Her strike. But Traoré smiled. He didn't take the podium. He didn't ask permission. He simply turned to the crowd and, with a voice barely raised, asked, "What democracy silences the truth when it makes them uncomfortable?" The room tensed. A ripple. Then a question from a young reporter, "Mr. Traoré, do you believe Kristi Noem represents tyranny?" Another silence. And then, "No," Traoré replied. "I believe she represents fear, dressed up as order." The quote went viral in less than 20 minutes. Clips exploded across social media. "Fear dressed as order, Traoré levels U.S. governor." He didn't yell. He didn't beg. He just told the truth. "We need leaders like this," say thousands in protest rallies. Back in South Dakota, her team scrambled. Interviews were cancelled. Internal polling took a nosedive. Even longtime conservative hosts hesitated to defend her on air. One Fox commentator muttered, "She lit a fire she can't put out." Meanwhile, Traoré was asked to speak again, this time, officially. A joint invitation from several African-American lawmakers and one brave senator from Vermont. When he stepped onto that next podium, he didn't mention Noem. He didn't have to. The message was clear. This wasn't about political theater anymore. This was a reckoning. And Traoré wasn't just part of it. He was its face. Kristi Noem had underestimated one thing: the world was watching. What she thought was a power play had become a global litmus test. And everywhere, from Harlem to Johannesburg, from Paris to Sao Paulo, people were making a choice. And they weren't choosing her. Across the United States, students began staging sit-ins at universities. Their signs didn't just say free speech. They bore 4 words that had come to define a moment. Fear dressed as order. Cable pundits scrambled to reclaim the narrative. He's an outsider, barked one. A foreign agitator, claimed another. But the footage kept circulating. Not doctored. Not edited. Just raw. Traoré, composed, relentless, refusing to bow. In Minneapolis, a young black teen, barely 15, stood on a traffic barrier and shouted through a megaphone. If Traoré can stand alone in their house and speak the truth, what's stopping us from doing it here? His words, captured on live stream, went viral. Within hours, marches had spread to 10 cities. And then came the unexpected blow. A leaked internal memo from Noem's office revealed a plan to blacklist journalists who had given Traoré excessive coverage. The document named networks, producers, even individual camera operators. One line was underlined in red. Control the lens, control the outcome. But it was too late. That same day, Traoré was invited to appear before the Congressional Subcommittee on Foreign Policy. As he entered, flanked by African delegates, the mood shifted. Gone was the forced politeness. Gone was the tight-lipped containment. Now, there was tension. There was anticipation. And there was respect. Noem tried to save face. She issued a press release emphasizing her commitment to international dialogue. But nobody bought it. Because the truth was clearer than ever. Traoré didn't need America's permission to lead. He had already become a symbol. A storm. A voice that couldn't be tamed, not by governors, not by threats, not even by 1,000 cameras. And in the silence that followed his steps into that chamber, one thing rang louder than any speech. The people had chosen fire over fear. The chamber fell into silence as Ibrahim Traoré sat before the Congressional Subcommittee. Cameras clicked, pens hovered, and eyes narrowed. Kristi Noem sat stiff-backed behind the row of Republican hawks, her arms folded, her stare icy. But Traoré? He adjusted his microphone, looked up slowly, and began, not with rage, not with theatrics, but with a calm that cut deeper than fury. You call me a threat to your order, he said. But what order are we talking about? The one built on blood? On resource theft? On silencing voices until they whispered just loud enough to entertain you, but never loud enough to challenge you? The first few seconds were met with tight jaws and forced professionalism. But with each word, Traoré's voice echoed like a verdict from history itself. You fear what I represent. Not because I bring chaos, but because I bring memory. I am the living reminder that Africa remembers everything. The gold you stole. The leaders you killed. The dictators you propped up. We remember. And now, we speak. Senator Buckley interrupted, his voice sharp. Mr. Traoré, this isn't a courtroom. No, Traoré said. But some of you should be on trial. Gasps. Even from behind the cameras. Kristi Noem leaned forward, her fingers tight around a pen, ready to jump in. But she never got the chance. Because Traoré turned to her. And you, Governor Noem. You called me a threat. I wear that title with pride. If standing up for sovereignty, dignity, and truth makes me dangerous, then let the world know. Africa is no longer safe for tyrants. The hearing descended into controlled chaos. The chair banged his gavel. Networks cut into breaking news. Twitter exploded with clips. Hashtag sword. Hashtag Traoré testifies. Hashtag not your order. Hashtag Africa will speak. Outside the capital, crowds gathered in stunned silence before erupting into chants. Inside, one congressman whispered to another. We just handed him the world stage. And it was true. Because this wasn't a testimony anymore. It was a reckoning. Not just of Traoré's making, but of centuries clawing their way to the surface through one man's voice. And as he stood to leave, he paused for just a second, looked back at the American officials frozen in their seats, and said, You built your order on silence. I came to break it. Outside the capital, the rain had begun to fall. Not heavily, just enough to blur the camera lenses and make the marble steps shine beneath the dimming sky. But even the rain couldn't cool the fire Traoré had ignited. Protesters and supporters alike stood shoulder to shoulder, many silent, many chanting. But all watching. Back inside, the halls were chaos. Republican aides scrambled, whispers turning into damage control memos. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox, each network ran the same clip, Traoré saying, If I am a threat, it is because you built your peace on silence. In a private corridor, Kristi Noem stood by a column, phone pressed to her ear, whispering sharp commands to her communications team. Her usual poise had cracked, just a hairline fracture, but one deep enough to shake donors, advisors, and think tanks alike. Meanwhile, Ibrahim Traoré was being ushered to a private side exit by 2 UN representatives. But he stopped. No. I'll go out the front. They hesitated. Are you sure? It's not safe. Exactly, Traoré said. Let them see what fear looks like when it refuses to run. Outside, the crowd shifted as the doors opened and Traoré emerged, not flanked by bodyguards or handlers, but alone, hands clasped behind his back. The chants surged, phones lifted, flashes sparked. A reporter shouted from the front. Governor Noem called you a destabilizing force. What's your response? She's right, Traoré answered, stepping closer. If her definition of stability means keeping Africa poor, voiceless, and compliant, then yes, I am here to destabilize. I will collapse that comfort. I will topple that illusion. The crowd roared. But he wasn't finished. This isn't about diplomacy anymore. It's about dignity. And I came to remind the world, our dignity is not up for negotiation. Not with Noem. Not with Trump. Not with any empire that pretends to care only when we disobey. At that moment, a second question came, this time from a child, barely 10, standing beside her father. Mr. Traoré, are you afraid? He looked at her and smiled. Only of forgetting where I came from. And of leaving without finishing what I started. The cameras caught it all. In one clip, Traoré towered under the U.S. Capitol dome, drenched in rain but unmoved, like a statue that history hadn't carved yet, but would soon. That night, while Kristi Noem delivered a scripted rebuttal on prime time, one clip outpaced her on every platform. A little girl asking Traoré if he was afraid. And Traoré answering like a man with nothing to fear. But silence itself. The next morning, Washington didn't wake up to politics as usual. It woke up to something different, something raw. The kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from being stunned into listening. Overnight, Traoré's speech had eclipsed every scheduled headline. Editorials struggled to frame him. Was he a revolutionary? A populist? A rising global force? None of the usual labels fit neatly. What was clear was this: he had shifted the conversation from power to principle. From image to truth. At the United Nations Annex where Traoré was temporarily staying, the air was still. But not calm. He sat alone at a small table, reading the news on a tablet, each headline echoing back his own words, I am here to destabilize. Dignity is not up for negotiation. Let them see what fear refuses to run from. Across the ocean, protests had erupted in parts of West Africa, rallies not just in support of Traoré, but in defiance of the systems that had kept their nations in economic chains for decades. The youth waved not flags, but phones, replaying his speech like scripture. Inside the White House, Trump's circle convened in a rushed, private meeting. Kristi Noem was present, tight-lipped, arms crossed. National security advisors tossed out phrases like, contain the fallout, and neutralize the threat. He's not just challenging us, one of them said. He's exposing us. Then we bury him in narrative, Trump snapped. We paint him as a dictator. As dangerous. As unstable. Noem didn't speak. She just stared out the window, jaw clenched. She had called him a threat. Now she feared he'd become the spark. Meanwhile, Traoré prepared to leave for his final appearance, an open press conference on the steps of the UN. He wore the same uniform, not a tailored suit like the other leaders, but the field jacket of a commander who'd never left his people's side. Standing before the cameras, he didn't begin with a speech. He began with a moment of silence. A full minute. No words. Just the sound of rain falling faintly in the background and camera shutters clicking, impatient. Then he looked up and said, "The West calls for order. But order for who? Silence for who? Peace for who? If standing here makes me dangerous, then let it be known, I will not sit. If telling the truth makes me a threat, then let it be known, I will not lie. If refusing to bow makes me a target, then let it be known, I do not kneel. History is watching. And I have no intention of leaving this stage quietly." The crowd didn't erupt. It froze, just like the UN did days ago. Because everyone knew. This wasn't the end of Traoré's visit. It was the beginning of something far louder.